Good morning. Happy Monday, new week, time change. Thank you everyone for joining us today for Ophea's winter safety check-in session, focusing on the updated swim assessment, formerly known as the swim test standards. My name is Selena Churro. I use she, her pronouns. I am a projects leader at Ophea and lead the safety standards project known as the Ontario Physical Activity Safety Standards in Education, or OPAS. With me today are my colleagues Janine and Katie, who will be supporting the back end of the session and monitoring the chat box. Also with us is Damien Benedict and Joanne Walsh, who are Ophea's Safety and Injury Prevention Advisory Committee members and consultants who also supported the swim assessment updates on OPAS. Before I begin, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the land upon which I'm presenting from and Ophea's work takes place on. I am a colonial settler from Treaty 381, otherwise known as the Niagara region, which is situated on treaty land. This land is steeped in the rich history of the First Nations, such as the Haudenosaunee, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Because of this treaty relationship, it is acknowledged that we are all treaty people and have a responsibility to meaningfully and continually respect this territory. Ophea's work takes place on traditional Indigenous territories all across Ontario. We are grateful for the opportunity to meet and work on these territories and recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on this land. We are aware that our settler acknowledgement uses language which may differ from language used by Indigenous peoples. Our land acknowledgement seeks to recognize the Indigenous territories where our work happens, and in the true spirit of truth and reconciliation, it strives to be more than just words. By learning, understanding, and acknowledging, we wish to pay respect to the rich Indigenous history of Ontario. I would also like to take a moment to introduce you to our guest presenters today. So here on the left, we have Joanne Walsh. Joanne has dedicated over 35 years to the education sector. She began her career with the Halton District School Board, where she served as a secondary school teacher and then a department head, and later became the coordinator of health and physical education. Joanne then transitioned to teaching part-time at Brock University as a part-time instructor in the Faculty of Education and supporting Ophea's good work as a curriculum and safety consultant, roles which she continues. Joanne is passionate about health and physical education and supporting educators in their work to help students acquire the comprehension, commitment, and capacity to lead healthy, safe, and active lives. On the right, we have Damien. Damien is a veteran educator and safety advocate with over 20 years of teaching and leadership within the Toronto District School Board. He is currently teaching science, math, and a guidance counselor and team lead at the intermediate grade level. His commitment to institutional safety is further reflected in his work with the Safety and Injury Prevention Advisory Committee for over a decade across safe schools, staffing, and school revitalization committees. Damien also brings a unique administrative perspective as a Toronto District School Board sports convener and a member of the board of directors for the Toronto City Youth Rugby Club and coaching high-performance rugby in Ontario. Professionally, he is passionate about building a culture where character triumphs over talent, ensuring that safety and inclusivity are the foundations of student success. Ophea is very grateful to have both Damien and Joanne on our CPAC committee and here today to support this session. So the purpose of today's session is to increase the understanding of the changes to the swim assessment standards, which were formerly known as the swim test, in the Ontario Physical Activity Safety Standards in Education, and the rationale for these changes. We'll identify tools and resources available to support implementation. We'll also seek input regarding additional supports that may be needed for implementation on your end, as well as provide an opportunity to ask questions and identify additional areas of support. It is important to note that this session is designed to provide valuable information and resources to support a better understanding of safety and physical activity settings. For questions related to specific situations involving the swim assessment and water-related activities occurring in a curricular, intramural, or interschool setting, we encourage you to submit those questions in writing to Ophea through our online Ask Ophea tool or directly emailing us at safety@ophea.net. So my colleague Janine just put that in the chat box for everyone. This just allows Ophea to ensure consistent responses, tracker answers, and provide information on relevant and contextual specific situations where you may need support. So Ophea always encourages you to reach out for those specific questions whenever you are guiding some guidance on the best possible solution and results. In addition, I would like to share our session content disclaimer. OPAS represents the minimum standards for risk management practice for school boards in Ontario for curricular and intramural club physical activities and inter-school sports. Please note that each school board is responsible for developing their own safety policy. Publicly funded schools in Ontario may raise the standards if they wish, but are strongly encouraged not to lower them. Ultimately, the primary responsibility for the safety of students rests with the school boards and their employees. Therefore, we strongly recommend that teachers, coaches, intramural supervisors, school administrators check with their school board to ensure alignment with their school board policies. To learn more, please review the About section on the OPAS website. As stated in the About page on the website, the intent of OPAS aligns with the Ministry of Education's Equity and Inclusive Education Strategy, and changes made to the safety standards continue to reflect and align with the Ontario strategy to support educators in meeting their obligations to provide safe and equitable access to learning, including physical activity experiences that occur in an educational setting. The intent of the Ontario Physical Activity Safety Standards in Education is to contribute to an equitable, inclusive, and safe education system by providing information and direction that will assist teachers, coaches, intramural supervisors, school administrators with the safe implementation of physical activities for all students. So this is for all students to minimize the inherent element of risk in fulfilling their obligation to provide a safe environment while also promoting and upholding Indigenous rights and human rights. This includes supporting and establishing physically and emotionally safe environments by treating students equitably and with respect, being sensitive to the factors that influence student learning to increase participation in physical activity, understanding and attempting to reduce systemic barriers that prevent engagement in physical activity, and support educators by identifying safe instructional practices to account for the diverse needs of all students to safely engage in physical activity. Realizing the promise of diversity, Ontario's Equity and Inclusive Education Strategy sets out a vision for an equitable and inclusive education system. The action plan focuses on respecting diversity, promoting inclusive education, and identifying and eliminating discriminatory biases, systemic barriers, and power dynamics that limit students' learning, growth, and contribution to society. These barriers, whether overt or subtle, intentional or unintentional, need to be identified and addressed. Ophea is committing to help create this shift as we action our own equity-centered strategy for well-being in Ontario schools, so every student can thrive. I'll now pass it over to Joanne to discuss what sparked the change to the swim test standards.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for attending. And we're grateful that you're interested in learning about these changes and sharing this with our broader community. When we're talking about what sparked the changes to the swim test requirements, much of what Selena had spoken about in the prior slides was essentially what sparked the change. Recognizing not only from the practices that were in OPAS, but also concerns with schools be able to access facilities, pools, students' ability to swim. There were many, many barriers that impeded students' ability to engage in all physical activity offerings within an educational setting. And so it was time to really look at the influencing factors and the barriers that that prohibited all students from engaging in these really important activities, and then to address those as best we could. And essentially that all of that resulted in reviewing the swim test as a prerequisite to participation. Essentially, equity of access to all physical activities offered in an educational setting, all students all the time. How can we potentially try to do that while keeping all students safe in, on, and around water. What are those factors that limit participation? So we know that access to swimming lessons is not a reality for a lot of our young students. We know that all of our students, we know that their experience in and around water in Ontario, which is a province that has vast bodies of water, as well as ability, which comes right back to access to swimming lessons, or essentially how their body moves and how they're able to move. Those are all things that limited their participation, because if they could not be successful and pass the criteria that were in the swim test, they could not participate in any of these activities, which essentially over a lifetime limits them, because they don't learn the skills and the safety skills to keep themselves safe in and around water. There's a lots of barriers and access to facilities and personnel to actually conduct the swim test, getting students to and from a pool, getting access to a pool, who does the swim test, who signs off on the swim test. There were a number of barriers there as well. And then essentially we know that time, transportation, and cost is a factor ongoing in many aspects of board business, but specifically in terms of the swim test. And then the most important, when we looked at all those factors and barriers, was what is the current research on drowning prevention behaviors? What are the protocols that prevent drowning, and what individual knowledge and behaviors do students and everyone who works with students in those water-based settings, what do they need to know and be able to do that reduce that risk of drowning? And that essentially was the barriers and the factors. And then we began our work around really looking at what the research said. I will say at the end of the workshop, there will be a slide that has some of the research that we looked at, not a proliferation of, but just so that you know that it is part of this workshop and that you'll be able to access that on your own time. So when we take a look at the intent, if we can flip the slide, Selena. The intent, thank you. The intent of the updates. This was a 4-year endeavor with a large group of individuals who supported it from diverse sectors in Ontario. From our education sector, we had input from the Ontario Camps Association and individuals working directly with the committee. We also had our Ophea internal systems safety team with us. There were safety leads, and you've met 2 of us here. There was also another 3 or 4 systems safety leads who were part of it. We had teachers as part of it, because they are the practitioners who ultimately make this happen for students. And we had outdoor education experts, because they are generally the outside activity providers who facilitate these off-site for our students, and risk management experts to support us with the research and with translating the research in terms of the age group we're looking at and the setting we're looking at, what the research said, so that we could take all of that and then accomplish the goals of the swim test revision, which is to align with that current research and evidence that keeps all students safe, not only in the water, but on the water and around the water, really to take a much more comprehensive approach to risk management. So rather than that one snapshot, which was the swim test that governed whether students would be safe in, on, and around water, that was the litmus test that was used, as well as that was essentially it, to determine whether they could or could not participate in water-based activities. So looking at the research, we adopted a much more comprehensive approach to risk management by looking at a number of factors and being attentive to those, and they'll be addressed in this workshop, so you know what they are. And then ultimately, again, to reduce or eliminate the barriers to participation, the goal to eliminate, but if we couldn't, at least reduce them. We were also, as we curated the standards, we consulted a number of sport organizations who work in the water-based activities area to help inform those standards and align them with current practices in their field. And then the other part of the work, and you will see this as you look at the water-based standards, is that it wasn't one activity, but we looked at all watercraft activities. We looked at all water-based activities, to review to ensure that they're consistent. So the standards that are consistent across all water-based activities, that we looked at the standards specifically to watercraft that would contribute to keeping students safe in and around water, and then standards for water-based activities where students are actually in the water. What are those standards? And then ultimately either revising the standards that were there or creating and curating new standards to continue to maintain a high level of student safety for all students participating in watercraft and water-based activities. So essentially, this is the tip of the iceberg around research. And as I mentioned, towards the end, there are links to the research for you to peruse yourself. They're not all the research we looked at, but this is essentially the tip of what we found from the research. That a swim test alone does not provide evidence to practices that are effective in drowning prevention. There are a number of instances where students with a high level of ability, not aware of the water in which they were participating, struggled in that environment, and there are incidences of drowning. So we recognize that the swim test alone did not keep students safe. In fact, the number one, the priority is wearing a properly fitted and properly secured personal flotation device or life jacket. They're different. They do similar things, is the key element to drowning prevention. When students are wearing life jackets or people are wearing life jackets, but they're not done up or they're not properly fitted for their body, yes, there are incidences of drowning, but when it is properly fitted and properly secured, then it is a key element in drowning prevention. The next part is supervision. And this is part of our document and our standards, is the vigilant and appropriate supervision. So really being attentive to what's happening, but also the number of people that are there supervising based on the students who are participating in that activity. And that is essential to student safety and injury prevention, including drowning incidences. That when we look at the drowning incidents for the demographic, we were working with students in a curricular setting. We looked at recreational settings, and supervision or lack thereof is a key component in drowning incidences. And then what is effective in terms of a means of rescue when someone is in trouble, and that has to do with the safety craft and the safety equipment available. So we looked at what our document said around safety craft to support that effective supervision of participants while they're participating in the activity, but then also as an efficient means of rescue if it's required. And finally, looking at the evidence on drowning prevention really highlights it's not that one stop about the ability to swim. What it is about, first of all, the people who are engaged with working with students are not only aware of their swimmability, which the swim test did, but also their comfort and experience in various types of water environment. If it's in a pool, that's one environment, but a lake environment and waterfront is a very different characteristic, and it's a very different experience. So what are our students' experiences there? And then also, too, in terms of what their knowledge of those and the skills required in those various bodies of water. So those are the key factors that are elements in terms of drowning and emergency situations and what results in emergencies. And so we worked with that research, and then we moved on to to curating, to revising, to creating new standards that addressed all of what we learned in order to allow all students to participate in water-based and watercraft activities, regardless of swimmability, comfort, and experience, which comes right back to equitable practices and reducing barriers to participation. All right, we can go to the next slide. So this is a snapshot. So there's a lot on this slide. I'm just going to go through them sort of bit by bit in terms of what was that comprehensive risk management approach. And then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Damien, who will speak specifically to each factor in terms of how that was addressed in the standard. So essentially, for those of you who are aware of OPAS and use the safety standards, it is structured so that there are components or sections, which is equipment, facilities, clothing, footwear, jewelry, and then there's special rules and instructions that involves the policy awareness piece, what teachers need to be aware of before they engage students, the preparation phase that they need to think about before they engage in students, and then the type of instruction, and then the other part is supervision. So that's the division, which is why these are divided this way. So essentially under safety equipment, we looked at the personal equipment that students need. So that's an example where we looked at all of the PFD requirements, and we also looked at the safety craft requirements. In terms of the policy awareness, we looked at things around what is informed consent. What do we need to know? What do parents and caregivers need to know about the activity in order to be able to give that informed consent around element of risk? We also looked at all of the teacher awareness requirements and what it is that teachers need to know and be able to do as they're preparing. We looked at program modifications and what they need to be to support all students participating in, on, and around water. And we are aware that folks are really interested in that component. So there's some information about that. And then the part of the preparation was the two pathways now, that whether it continues to be an in-water assessment, which is not just ability, but it's also their comfort in the water, or is it the pathway of a swim ability and swim comfort assessment questionnaire? Damien will talk a little bit more about that and the difference between the two. And then ultimately, what's the instruction? What do students need to know in terms of safety and skills in order to participate in the activity safely, regardless of ability, comfort, and experience? And then finally, we did look at the supervision type and the ratios. There has not been changes to those because they were effective in and of themselves. But that doesn't mean that when you're looking at supervision, it's not something you should account. It's something that you should account for based on the number of students and what you learn from the swim assessment questionnaire. So that was the overview. There's lots there, and we will definitely circle back as needed. But I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Damien now, who will walk through each of those specific requirements.
Thanks, Joanne. So we're going to spend some time on the next few slides just kind of going through the sections that Joanne just highlighted and looking more specifically at how they've been impacted on the relevant activity pages according to safety standards. So in terms of the equipment, first piece here, I just want to draw your attention to two key factors. The first and foremost being life jackets and PFDs and the requirements. Wearing a correctly fitting and properly secured PFD, again, is the key element in drowning prevention. It's what really saves lives, not the swim test itself. And all of our updated standards require that all students, as well as those who are assisting in the activity, also need to wear PFDs and life jackets while they're in, on, and around the water. And this, of course, is because wherever there's a depth of water posing a risk, these will save lives. So whether that's water-based watercraft activities or like things in non-designated swim areas such as lakes, ponds, rivers, etc. And the second piece of the equipment has to do with the safety craft. Safety craft are really key in terms of maintaining that vigilant and appropriate supervision that is also essential to student safety, injury prevention, and as well as, being able to respond to any incidents that occur in, on, and around the water. Safety craft supports participation and supervision of participants, because if a rescue is needed and the vigilant and appropriate supervision is there, they can respond immediately. And revising these standards also takes into consideration the needs, the swimmability, the students' comfort, and making sure that anyone can now participate in the activity regardless of their swim ability. So again, having these two pieces really sort of helps address the fact that we are making the swim or watercraft activities accessible to all. All right. I guess we can move on to the next. So here under special rules and instructions, we have first and foremost the element of informing consent. So making sure that people who are participating are fully aware of all of the risks involved in the activities they're about to participate in, especially this information being communicated to parents and guardians. So in order for this informed consent to be done properly, we need to make sure that the description of all elements of the activity are expressed, that you've also been able to describe the location, the environment, the conditions. We're also looking at outlining all risks of participation, including some possible injuries. We're looking at taking precautions to reduce the risk as much as possible. And we're also informing the consent that also includes that parents and guardians are aware of the PFD and life jacket requirements of their child in order to participate in these activities. This next area focuses on the awareness and making sure that there is more comprehensive risk management practices. So in addition to other standard requirements, that all teachers and individuals assisting activity be aware of the student's ability, their comfort, their experience. This goes to supporting that shared supervision and monitoring of students. So as a teacher who's supervising, you know what your students are capable of, and any on-site supervisors as well, or monitors, are also being shared with that information. And then that brings us down to the program modifications. These are based on data collected for students, based on their ability, their comfort. And for example, in watercraft activities, situating a student nearer or closer to the teacher, the qualified instructor, the monitor, who is wearing a PAFD with greater buoyancy, taking into consideration things like trip parameters, like the length of the trip, the distance participants might be going from the shore, how many supervisors or monitors you might have, the placement of students in relation to these supervisors and monitors. So all of this is really just modifying the program to suit what you see in front of you as that supervisor and monitor. Because no two situations are the same, so we have to make adjustments and modifications accordingly. In pools, for example, requiring students to wear a PFD life jacket at all times is based on, again, the results of that in-water swim test. And again, the only time that a PFD or life jacket should be removed is if they are getting and receiving direct supervision and instruction during instructional times from that supervisor. And then again, last piece here, informing that relevant individuals such as outside activity providers, trip guides, aquatic instructors, lifeguards for the swimmability, that they're able to support identifying program modifications as well as being vigilant monitors of the students who are participating in the activity themselves. Okay, and moving on. This third area we're going to look at under the special rules and instructions has to do with the swim assessment itself. This work was really based on the research that kind of emphasized that the evidence and research specific to practices are effective in drowning prevention and also reducing the barriers for our students to participate in them. The update here, we're just looking at making that students can participate in all activities regardless of their swim ability when they are wearing a properly secured and fitted PFD and life jacket for all watercraft-based sports. And this also allows for students who do not successfully complete the in-water assessment to participate in an activity as long as they're wearing a PFD and life jacket. Again, that is properly secured and fitted. And it may, again, only be removed during swim instruction when there is direct supervision by the teacher or aquatic instructor. for the purposes of learning to swim only. Now, important to note here that school boards and teachers may choose to complete an in-water swim assessment in order to gather in additional information about the student's ability and their water comfort if they so desire. And the next section under special rules and instructions, this fourth area is about looking at emergency procedures and safety rules, which have also been updated to include additional safety information for students, that what they should not what they should know, but what they must know, and emergency procedures that must be followed to safely engage in the activity. So, for example, being familiar with safety rules and emergency procedures specific to the watercraft activity in which they will participate, making sure they must know the PFD life jacket requirements. They must know their buddy responsibilities, what to do in the event of a capsize or a swamp of the boat, and staying with the boat and use it as a life raft. After initial instructions, students must demonstrate the ability to select a proper fitting PFD and life jacket, and as well as securing it and fastening it properly. Lastly, under supervision, all watercraft and water-based activities supervision requirements were reviewed. We reviewed them to determine the appropriate type and ratio for each and every activity for effective supervision. And we also made sure that any gaps in alignment with other watercraft activities with similar risks were addressed and modified. For this next slide, we're looking at swim assessment requirements for watercraft activities. So on this slide, for all watercraft activities that occur in a curricular setting, the requirement is that a swim ability and swim comfort assessment questionnaire must be completed, as well as submitted for all students in order to participate. The only condition that would prohibit any participation is if the questionnaire is not completed and not submitted. So the rationale for this is that all participants must wear a correctly fitting, properly secured, Canadian-approved PDFD and life jacket. And this is the primary behavior that reduces and prevents all drowning. In terms of inter-school competition and watercraft activities, for example, dragon boating, the requirement is that student athletes must complete and submit the swim ability and swim comfort assessment questionnaire. Again, because all participants must wear a correct fitting, properly secured, Canadian-approved PDFD life jacket at all times, again, to reduce and prevent drowning. With rowing, students must successfully complete the in-water swim assessment. The students who do not complete the in-water swim assessment must be identified and wear a Canadian-approved inflatable vest-style PDFD or inflatable life jacket so they may participate in the activity, but also be equipped in the event of a capsize or other situation that may arise. Again, rationale for this is that there are safety boats carrying PFDs for students who successfully complete the in-water safety swim assessment, and one additional one for students wearing inflatable vest-style PDFDs. This is more of a precautionary piece for the safety boat. Okay, and moving on to water-based activities. Here we have, for the water-based activities occurring in a curricular setting, requirement is students must successfully complete an in-water assessment. Students who do not successfully complete the in-water swim assessment must be identified and wear a correctly fitting, properly secured, fastened, Canadian-approved PFD or life jacket at all times when on deck, in the water, or around the water. If not, they will not be able to participate in the activity. For swimming on a watercraft or land-based trip, this is land-based trips only, requirement is students must successfully complete an in-water assessment. Students who do not successfully complete this in-water swim assessment will be identified and wear a correct fitting, properly secured, fastened, Canadian-approved personal flotation device, PFD, or life jacket at all times when near the water or where the depth of the water poses a risk. And when they're in the water, they must wear it or they must not participate in the activity. The in-water assessment requirements applies to swimming on land-based trips. So if you're on a hiking trip, only because when swimming on a watercraft trip, all participants are wearing our correctly fitting and properly secured PFD at all times near the water as well. So therefore, the in-water assessment is not required as a minimum standard. All students must complete and submit a swim ability and swim comfort assessment questionnaire. For instructional swimming only, this is when the PFD and life jacket may be removed during instructional swims when students are direct supervision by that aquatics instructor during their learn to swim skill instruction.
Thank you, Damon. I'll now pass it over to Joanne to present on the sample swim ability and swim comfort assessment questionnaire form.
So this is, as we say, it's a sample because it's something that either can be used as is or can be customized to your board and working with organizations. So that's what we do at Ophea and OPAS, is that we provide the samples as a starting point, and then you can customize them as needed for additional information or specificity of the activity. It's to help you gather the data that you need for the students that you would like to offer that activity. And they are 4 activities where students must wear PFDs, life jackets at all times. If they're so that's a key point, is that we'll only use this one if it's a watercraft activity or students are wearing life jackets at all times. And what it's looking to do is to gather information from the parent and guardian and the student, depending on the age of the student, of the 3 factors: their swim ability, swim experience, and comfort. And you'll notice that I spoke about it and Damien spoke about it quite extensively, that those are the 3 elements that we want to know more about. We also want to know more about the body of water in which the activity is. We also want to know more about that based on the body of water in which the activity takes place. So there'd be we'd want to know different things in terms of a pool-based activity versus a pond, a lake, or a river. So the tool is intended to use for curricular, intramural, and inter-school settings. As Damien noted, that there have been changes to the inter-school standards as well. And as I said, it may be customized. So Celine, if you can go to the tool, that would be helpful. And Janine has put the tool, the link to the tool in the chat box so that you can find it. The other way you can search for it is in OPAS. There is something called tools and resources in a section, and you'll find it on the right-hand side down at the very bottom under forms. So it's sample ability and swim comfort assessment questionnaire. So you can find it there as well. Thanks, Selena. All right. So essentially, the prior to participation in watercraft activities, teachers must be aware of all students' ability and swim comfort. That's part of the standard. If you go to any of the watercraft pages, you'll see that in that teacher preparedness section, and then it describes essentially what I said. So the first information makes sense. This is divided into, Celine, if you can scroll up just a little bit, or sorry, the other way. There you go. Great. So really, this is divided into looking at what certification students may have, because if they have a badge of some sort or they've had some swim lessons of some sort, then you would have a sense of what their ability would be. So essentially it's that, have they participated in a certified swim instruction program? The reason certified is because we know those programs are designed in terms of very specific water safety things like treading water. It might be surface dives. It might be rolling entry backwards. It's on basic strokes, floating, those kinds of things. So we know that when they're in a certified swim program, that you know that they've received some of that kind of instruction. And then also in terms of where it occurred, a pool or a pond, lake, river, some students may experience that instruction in a camp setting over the summer. But they may not have a certification necessarily, but they've been in that type of water. And then if so, It's about what certification do they have. So that, again, allows you a sense of to what degree they've been involved in formal swim programming. But it, again, a certification or experience is not the requirement, or the ability is not the requirement. This is just to get a profile and understanding of the amount of time or the experiences your students have had in a water setting, and with whom, and what degree of instruction. Okay. So that first part is to gather as much information as you can based on that. The next part, that's the ability. The next part is the comfort and the experience. So we've talked about comfort and experience go hand in hand, and that's why you see shortened is called the Swimmability Swim Comfort Assessment Questionnaire, but it's also about the experience, and it's divided into the 2 water environments. So the pool environment, including backyard pools where students may not have had formal instruction, but they have had experience in a water setting in a backyard pool, and then divided into in terms of pond, lake, river environment. So what we've tried to do here is to provide a little bit of guidance around what are we looking for around the experience and the comfort. So we look at no experience. They've never been in a pool environment. They don't know what that water feels like. And then some are limited experience, so infrequently. They've maybe splashed around in a shallow end. They may be playing, splashing, wading at one of those local kind of water parks, but that's the limit of their experience. So that tells you a little bit more about what it would be like if you actually put them in a pool environment. And then experience that if they're the experience would be that they're comfortable in the deep end, they can tread water, they can swim without assistance. So those 3 criteria, you can take this, you can add more criteria if you'd like to, but that was essentially the guide. And then the comfort level, the 4 levels of being really uncomfortable, that you would know that if you put them in the water or they're described as in the water, they wouldn't let go of the wall, or they for only a brief period. And we've seen that if we've been around pool environments. Limited to some, they'll swim without fear, but very close to the wall. That's a fairly common characteristic when you're watching students in a water environment and their comfort level. A moderate level where they'll swim with fear and calm, and fairly calm water with others. That's sort of another distinctive character. And then confident, essentially without fear anytime. They'll go under the water, they'll swim with ease, they'll tread water. So what we tried to do with our group who are water safety experts, what does it look like when we work with students, and what kind of things do we look for where we know essentially where the student fits in that level of experience and comfort. So the similar we did around the pond, lake, and river environment. So it's the same idea. They've never been in that environment. They may have been in the environment, but very close to shore, at a beach in shallow water, kind of wading in at a local conservation area, something like that, but not really in the water. And then the experience where they can move away from shore, they can go into deep water or shoulder depth, tread water without it. They can jump, they can dive. Essentially, they're comfortable in that water environment. The experience in that water environment, and then the comfort, the same thing, right? They might go into it, but they're wearing a PFD, and they won't take it off. If you ask them to move into the water, they won't take it. They're hesitant to take it off, and so on. So where a student would be they'd stay close to a dock, or they'd stay close to the raft. They'll let go for periods of time, but not really secure and moving away. The moderate would be things like swimming without fear, but still close to others, close to their friends, close to whoever is supervising. And then the confidence, essentially, it's like, as we might say, they're like fish in water. Right. And then the other part for all of these is there's always, I don't know. We parents and guardians may not have that, and that's okay. We just need to know that we don't have that kind of data. So how do we account for that kind of data that we don't have in terms of our programming? And then a couple of things that are additional that are helpful. And again, you can add to this if you choose to, especially with the watercraft activities. Have students ever been in a watercraft? Do they have any paddling skills? Do they know what that feels like? And that's what that first question is about. is have they ever participated in any kind of paddling activity? That gives you a sense of their experience as well. And then essentially certifications. Again, we do have students who have been at summer camps for a long time or have access to environments in the summer, and they may have certifications, this particularly as they're in the 15 to 17 or 14 to 17-year-old range. So accounting for that, because this swim assessment and comfort questionnaire is meant to be used from grade 1 right to grade 12. And so we think about students who are in grade 12 and where they're at if we're taking them on let's say a 2-week canoe trip. Okay, so Selena, if we can scroll up. A few other things that we think about in terms of our students, what's their understanding of emergencies and emergency procedures? Not that we would have them as part of that emergency response. That's the adult responsibility and the supervisor responsibility. But to what degree are they comfortable in an emergency situation? Because the standards that have been created also, as Damien had referenced, really build out what students need to know and be able to do in an emergency situation. Because if all students know what their role is and what they need to do, then the emergency situation can proceed and be successful without incident, because we can focus on the student who needs that support when the other students know what their role and responsibility is. Also, that they don't put themselves more in an emergency situation by helping someone in where they shouldn't, which sometimes we do see in situations where there's drownings or incidences of potential drowning. So that's that. And then, Selena, if you scroll down, and then the last part is essentially other information. What else might you tell us that we can tell? And I think it's really important for parents and guardians to understand, and that's part of that element of risk that Damien spoke about, is that this is not to prohibit participation. So we need full information as much as we can to ensure that when their child is engaged in a watercraft or a water-based activity, that we know as much as we can about them so that we can program properly and intentionally to ensure their safety by looking at all of those factors that are addressed on the activity pages. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. Selena?
So in addition, we would also like to highlight the disability-centered resources added to the tools and resource section on OPAS. These were launched back in September 2024. This updated content was to build on and align with the work that was already completed by Ophea on the disability-centered movement resources on ophea.net. This is a valuable resource that helps teachers identify additional program modifications to enable all students to participate in watercraft and water-based activities, regardless of swimmability or comfort. And the tool and resource is intended to provide safety considerations for students with disabilities, support teachers in establishing and maintaining a safe learning environment for physical education, intramural activities for students with disabilities, and increase teachers' confidence in providing these opportunities. So my colleague Janine will put that resource in the chat box for everyone. If we do have time, I will circle back at these Mentimeter questions, or we'll put them in an email, because we did want to hear from you. So what questions or clarifications are still needed related to all the information that was shared? I know that was a lot today. And what is your board or organization doing to raise awareness, or maybe they're not doing anything at this moment? So how can this information, this session, help raise that awareness, and what kinds of supports or resources are necessary to support your school board with the implementation of the new swim assessment safety standards? So in terms of next steps, I know that was a lot of information. So next steps for system leaders: review your school board's risk management practices to determine any updates that need to be made for students to participate in watercraft and water-based activities. Consult your board's risk management practices to determine additional requirements for students to participate in watercraft, water-based activities. determine what is needed to develop your board swim ability and swim comfort assessment questionnaire form that Joanne just presented on. And you can use this as a sample to provide them or to customize it. Identify key partners that need to be engaged to assist in this work, and also communicate the updated swim assessment standards with all the relevant staff and contacts in your networks. For all staff and system leaders, if you're not sure about the status of your school board swim assessment standards, you can check with your school board safety lead for the most up-to-date information. And for additional information, you can visit our bulletin post on the swim assessment updates, which is found in our new Engage and Learn section on the OPAS website. And as always, and as I mentioned earlier, please always contact the Ophea safety team, and you can email your questions and we'll always get back to them. So this slide will be provided in the recording, so I won't go into too much detail, but I just wanted to raise awareness of some of the background resources that Joanne mentioned that helped support the revisions. So there are multiple different organizations and research that was referenced when making the changes. And I did also want to highlight our additional resources where you can visit Parachute or Life Saving Society, which both organizations provide resources to enhance student knowledge and understanding of drowning prevention. I will now open it up for our Q&A session. So we have about 5 minutes remaining. I can just open up the chat box. I don't know, Joanne, Damien, if you saw any while I was speaking that you would like to address.
No, I've answered Mercedes' question and Shannon's question. I haven't seen any more, but happy to answer anything that we can in this forum.
Perfect. There is one question in the Q&A box. So I'm overseeing a summer camp setting. Just wondering if there have been any changes to the use of assistant lifeguards, Bronze Cross ? From my understanding, assistant lifeguards can be included in supervision ratios, but cannot exceed the number of NL lifeguards.
I can't answer that just in terms of not this, but in terms of the Ontario pool regulations and the camp regulations. And I think whoever is asking the question would be familiar with those regulations, which defines the number of lifeguards and assistant lifeguards. Pool regulation 565, the number of lifeguards and sorry, Mercedes, I apologize. Or assistant lifeguards, the regulations mandate that. In our standards, they essentially follow those. There is an increase based on the school setting, but we're not the authority in those standards. We use the pool regulations and the camp regulations in order to inform our standards. Our standards are never lower than what's in those Ontario regulations, but they do exceed them because they are because it's in a particular curricular setting or interschool setting. Okay.
Thank you, Joanne.
Shannon, in terms of I'm a director at Outdoor Education Center, how would this affect OCA standards for those camps that are accredited? We don't, OCA, we have a member on our organization. We continually work with that member who's on the executive of the OCA to actually support trying to align our standards in terms of camp standards and vice versa. And so anything that we do would not be contrary to, let's say, an OCA accredited standard. Where it meshes, where OPAS meshes with OCA is really your facility when your camp is used by school groups to engage students in those types of activities at your facility. This document doesn't impact summer camp programs because it's for an educational setting that the September to June. So that's essentially why it's awesome that you folks are here, because we know you often work with our schools in those shoulder months of your camp. So I hope that helped a little bit. And I think I don't know if there's any others. I think we've got it.
Those are all the questions. I know that was a lot of information that was shared. I know a few folks were asking about a recording. I'm going to just go to the next slide. There will be a recording made available shortly, and it will live on the Engage and Learn section that I had mentioned, where you can find the bulletin post on these updates. I just wanted to take this time to thank everyone for joining this Monday morning and learning with us today. All the links that were shared in today's session and a recording will be made available shortly to the email you used to register. If you do have any additional questions, or if we didn't answer your questions that you submitted when you registered for this session, please email safety@ophea.net and we will get back to you with an appropriate response. I hope this session was really beneficial, and we will circulate it soon. And I hope that everyone can also complete the Mentimeter that we didn't have a chance to participate in today, but we'll share that in our follow-up email. Thank you so much, everyone.